So I'm delighted to be greeted today by Travis Preston. Travis is a distinguished director and trainer of actors and theater makers, has a longstanding career recognized throughout the world. He's currently the dean of the CalArts School of Theater, the California Institute of the Arts, where he's also serving as artistic director of the CalArts Center for New Performance, a professional company operating out of Los Angeles. Travis's career is widespread with distinguished accomplishments. Just to cite a few, and I underscore a few of them, because I can go on for quite some time. Travis has directed such illustrious venues as the Almeida Theatre in London. He's toured work throughout the world to Australia, as well as throughout the US and Europe. With respect to the US, he is also formerly an artist in residence, an associate artistic director at the American Repertory Theatre in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as well as the Yale Repertory Theatre. And you're also a graduate of Yale, if I'm not mistaken. So, Travis, currently you're at CalArts, but traveling throughout the world and still doing your work as a director and a trainer and an important voice in our field. And I'm so grateful to have you here in this conversation today. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for this conversation. I look forward to it very much.
Cool. So the first question, of course, is we're in this current moment, it's as unique as it is challenging. We're dealing with a pandemic. It's affected, obviously, multiple industries, but especially the theater has been hit hard, so to speak. And for those of us who train theater artists, actors, directors, and so forth, designers, playwrights, how are you faring at CalArts, and how has your team adjusted to this unforeseen circumstance?
Well, I think that the COVID crisis required that we flip very quickly to a fundamentally online experience for our students. Paradoxically, it has worked out fairly well for us. It allowed us to activate skills in our students that we might not otherwise have approached. Certainly, the camera became central to that. And what we discovered was that our students had a lot of the tools to engage the landscape and the challenges of the coronavirus context in very, very creative ways, using camera and editing skills that they had as part of their iPhones, together with their computers. So we found a kind of uninvestigated creativity that was really exciting for us. Needless to say, there were frustrations as well. And the absence of in-person contact was terribly frustrating, continues to be terribly frustrating. And I think makes us value that experience far more than we might have, just because it's been taken from us.
You talk about uninvestigated creativity, and that's that's been, if I may say, a benchmark of CalArts throughout its history. An institution that commenced in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, under the auspices of Walt Disney of all people. How do you see yourselves as trainers and as students, as alumni of CalArts and the theater school in particular, meeting this moment so that when we do perhaps, and I think we will, I think we all hope we do, go back to some semblance of a new normal where we can come together and to share in a live event in person, and perhaps some mixed media experience, who knows. But how has this uninvestigated creativity, do you think, sort of have us facing forward so that we can meet the current moment and look towards the future in an empowered way?
Well, I think that it's led to discoveries of talents that might not have been engaged if the crisis had not been there. From my experience, I was head of acting at NYU for a period of time. And one of the things that I realize as I've been approached by many of the graduates of that program is that though they studied acting, they went on, many of them, into careers as writers, as directors, and certainly as producers as well. I think that this particular moment has enfranchised the actor as a maker of something. And that will engage skills that we certainly associate with acting, i.e., character and story. But they're having to address those skill sets from the standpoint of the camera and how to make something themselves, rather than to be a part of something that is made. And I find that has given them great power and a certain kind of agency that they've reveled in. And so how we've changed things moving into the fall is that we're focusing on training all the actors in 6 week modules to learn how to shoot and edit. That's just become a part of the training for the actor.
Wow, how wonderful! And it really is. It's current, and it would be current even without the virus, because, as you well know, training actors the way that perhaps you and I were trained, however long ago, it's a very different industry right now that has a different set of requirements. So, in training this sort of flexible, multi-skilled entrepreneurial artist, how do you, I mean, what opportunities do you think will be there for CalArts students in particular when you guys are able to come back and and the virus has subsided, and perhaps you can even speak to the Center for New Performance and as a particular venue for them. I mean, as content creators, as artists who are beginning with an idea and then working collectively to arrive at something that comes to fruition.
Well, I think it goes back to what I had mentioned before about agency. I think that we self-identify in certain ways. And as you probably know, most actors in the United States, when they come to train, have a vision of themselves on a red carpet with a statuette. Mm-hmm. And the reality of their creative life will be very, very different than that in most cases. What this time has done, it has challenged them to enfranchise parts of themselves that they may not otherwise have enfranchised, and to identify in ways that might expand their sense of what their creative life is. And it speaks to what you were saying about the agency of the endeavor. They have quite a lot of agency. I think they're much more inclined now to create things that they have designed from the ground up, as opposed to making something that was founded on a pre-existing script. That's certainly something we're seeing in the work that's being put forward.
Wonderful. And is it perhaps maybe an example that you could cite of your work or that of your students where you've essentially made something? Because I know that speaks to a lot of what you have done as well, especially through the CNP.
Well, it's interesting. I would certainly speak to what my students have done. I have we've had some bizarre situations because in the directing lab, one of our directors went back to the Philippines, and he where he's originally from, and he could only work at very, very odd hours of the evening for him, or actually early morning, to be consistent with the time of class, or a time when he could cooperate with his American colleague. His American colleagues were One was in La Jolla. Another was in Atlanta. And they were working on a 𝘰𝘦𝘵𝘗𝘵𝘳 piece. And they found it very, very difficult to engage the precise text of the work. So what he did was he guided them through a series of cinematic etudes that they shot in their particular locales, and then he put those etudes together in a way that I thought was quite fascinating and paradoxically very, I think, respectful of the tone of the Mishima. It was certainly not, you could never say it was a representation of that play. And actually, the name of the play escapes me at the moment, but it was a very evocative, atmospheric piece. And I don't think they would have come to that. And so I think it's awakened filmmaking skills in the team. I think it's awakened creation skill sets, i.e. they are generating stories themselves. And I suspect many of them will go on to careers as creators, in addition to their identity as interpreters.
Wonderful. And as you point out, it's so important to have that kind of agency, in today's industry. So finally, if I may ask, I guess on a personal and somewhat professional note, jointly, what's next for you as an artist, as a teacher, as a trainer, and by extension, your school?
Well, it's interesting that for me, I am bound to present the 𝘈𝘗𝘳𝘗 project here in the United States. I did present it in China. It premiered at the Wuzhen Theater Festival, and it is an extremely unique piece, one that does not interact very easily with the COVID situation because the audience goes into a very, very small space. The maximum audience is 40, and then they are moved. The element in which they're sitting is actually moved through the space. For a variety of reasons, this must be presented in the United States, both contractually and obviously in terms of spirit. I want that piece to be presented in the States. But we will have to wait for a global pandemic to subside before we have any ease of presentation.
And could you share for us a little bit what the 𝘈𝘗𝘗𝘗 project is and how it evolved?
Well, it was a cooperation with my friend Tom Gunning, who I say without hesitation is one of the foremost experts in the world on early cinema. 𝘈𝘗𝘗𝘗 was a figure based on a series of novels in the early 20th century, and it was a very important set of novels for the surrealists. And there was a set of films made by Fouillade, a great French filmmaker of the silent era, who made films about this figure of, just extraordinary malevolence and evil, dressed entirely in black, someone who bonded with the night. And this became something that Tom and I wanted to investigate in the context of the idea of terror and honestly, the idea of literal terrorism. The figure of 𝘈𝘗𝘗𝘗 had been associated, his origins had been associated with the early anarchists in Paris who did things like blow up a restaurant. And so we took this figure of infinite mystery, someone who was absolutely founded in a kind of evil intention, and we took that and its relationship to surrealism, and we made that the substance of the work. And then we decided that the only way that we could do this was actually to literally move the audience, that their experience of time and space had to be so disoriented. That was consistent with the novels. And so we created a box on wheels that had 4 projectors. And so we used considerable amount of animated projection. And this created a very, very disorienting experience for the audience. They often would experience something akin to seasickness. We had to actually counteract that because they couldn't tell whether they were moving or the image was moving. It's a very disorienting experience.
That's fantastic. Sounds like an extraordinary theatrical experience, and one that indeed people can look forward to once we do get back into some sense of being with each other, to commune, which is what theater in many respects has always been. So Travis, thanks so much for our time today. Really, it's great to see you and to see how well you're doing, all things considered with this pandemic. And your students are very fortunate to have you in such a leadership role at the School of Theater at CalArts.
Well, listen, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always, Peter.
Oh, thanks. Cheers. Bye now.